What up, Raffleators? Welcome back to my channel. Today we're talking about GuyHoc Park. Where is GuyHoc Park? The last time we were in this neck of the woods, we looked at Roxanne Burnham Gardens and some of the changes, the developments in that neighborhood that was named after former President Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham's daughter, Roxanne Burnham, and found that there is a natural demarcation between these communities, like a boundary. This is, for example, a this is, for example, a small bit of reserve, right? That's a bit of reserve that separates what was Blissingen Road, right? So we looked at Blissingen Road on that side of this divide, and on this side of the divide is called GuyHoc Park. So Roxanne Burnham Gardens is the adjacent community, that is the community that right directly butts up against Roxanne Burnham Gardens. And this street is a continuation of Blissingen Road. So Blissingen Road heading north, right, comes into this neck of the woods at the boundary between Roxanne Burnham Gardens on the east side and GuyHoc Park on the west side of the boundary. So this is Blissingen Road and that is Blissingen Road. These two roads running side by side with the reserve land in between, on which there are a couple of houses. For example, that house and houses on that piece of land are on the reserve. So Blissingen Road, and east of Blissingen Road is GuyHoc Park. Let's take a look at GuyHoc Park. Now, these are some of the neighborhoods that were built during the Burnham administration: South Ramville Gardens, Roxanne Burnham Gardens, GuyHoc Park, Festival City, Tuckburg. And so in New Amsterdam there was Tuckburg Park. So a number of these communities were built as initial housing schemes with tract housing. In other words, all the houses were exactly the same, and then over the years people, after purchasing them, managed to rebuild them in their own preference. So this, for example, is a house that is recently rebuilt. Next to it is typical. So this is a typical house, close to its initial rendering. That's how it looked in the beginning, and before people started modifying it. And then these are the modifications people eventually started to make to these houses in GuyHoc Park. So this, for example, is one that is being remodeled, rebuilt as a much larger residence in 2023. Next door, that looks like a renovation from the 1980s, 1990s, when they started converting them from wooden houses to concrete houses and then closing the bottom flat to create more living space. Right, so there are a bunch of these neighborhoods that were built in the 1970s, right? Roxanne Burnham Gardens, GuyHoc Park, South Ramville Gardens. These are all neighborhoods that were built in the 1970s as a part of the food, clothes and housing drive of the PNC government at that time. And in 2023, these have been transformed into much more unique neighborhoods after 50 years after more than 50 years of being occupied by homeowners, right? Being owned by people who purchased those initial homes and made them into, their own unique styles. And so this is what happened over the years. Oh, I see now there's a sign, even the name it's changed. Let's see what it says. This sign says, "Welcome to GuyHoc Gardens." So what used to be called GuyHoc Park is now called GuyHoc Gardens. So I don't know what the name GuyHoc comes from. Maybe housing, I don't know, and Guyana combined. Those of you who know a little bit about the history of GuyHoc Park can tell me about it. Right, but this is what it looks like in 2023. Some of these homes have definitely been transformed, right? So it seems as if there might have been multifamily homes already built here initially, but some of them have been, even the multifamily homes, have been transformed into more unique styles. Now this reserve of land is also part of, well, it's between what is now Aubrey Barker Road and Mandela Avenue. Is part of, I think the government used that, and it seems to be some kind of a water treatment plant occupying the reserve. That's looking back along Aubrey Barker Road. And the sign says GuyHoc Gardens, what used to be known as GuyHoc Park. And here's what it looks like in 2023. It's still the rainy season, so there's a fair amount of water on the land because of all of the problems with drainage and so on. But here's GuyHoc Gardens, GuyHoc Park. Well, it used to be called GuyHoc Park, but it's now called GuyHoc Gardens. And this seems to be the end of the neighborhood. Across there seems to be an auto shop. Powerline Automotive is the building, is a sign on the building. That's looking back at Aubrey Barker Road. As we take a walk down this boundary. So this is the western end of GuyHoc Gardens, also GuyHoc Park. Right beyond this boundary there is a industrial zone where there are a number of companies that use the land, the property for manufacturing. I think the Sonata Textiles Mill was also located in this neck of the woods back in the 1980s when there was a cloth manufacturer, literally cotton industry, where they grew cotton in the morning. Cotton was grown in the Kimbia region in Berbice and harvested and brought to Georgetown to be processed into cloth. That factory, I think, closed. Somebody bought it, Sonata Textiles Factory. I don't know who owns it now or if it still operates, but that was the era of the 1980s when development in this neck of the woods, that is GuyHoc Gardens, GuyHoc Park, was in full swing. Here's a rare example of one of the original homes, right? That's what it looks like initially. So a lot of them have been transformed. Some have kept some of these homes have kept their initial form factor. That is that they've been changed, extended, concretized, but the shape has remained. But most of them are now unrecognizable from the initial home that was built here. Right, this is GuyHoc Gardens in 2023. Some of the homes have been extended. Some of these multifamily units have also changed. You can see the clay brick, right? So the clay brick puts a date on some of these homes because there was a clay brick factory that produced these red bricks that were used primarily for home construction. Look at the road, for example. The road is covered with clay brick at this point, right? And representative of a time when there was a clay brick factory that manufactured clay brick for construction, home construction and road construction back in the 1980s. But now in 2023, you can see a lot of these homes no longer have their clay brick architecture, but are now modified to look a lot more North American. That is the ones that are recently constructed. This, for example, could be a home in South Georgia. All right, this is what is happening here in 2023 in GuyHoc Gardens. Now used to be GuyHoc Park. This, for example, is a home built in 2020s, in 2019, 2020, and so on. Because, of course, you can see the material 2020, 2021. This is what was popular in more recent times. In GuyHoc Gardens being transformed to look a lot more like the places where people returned from. So a lot of people migrated over the years, went to live in the south of the US, and eventually remigrated, came back and built homes that much more reflected or represented the kinds of houses they had either become accustomed to or liked. So this is GuyHoc Gardens in 2023. You can see the transformation right at the boundary. This is the western boundary, and a lot of the homes in this neck of the woods have been transformed into much more recent ideas of housing. Now beyond GuyHoc Park, there's a lot of industrial activity, a lot of industrial zone that is in the south, and new housing developments. I'm going to show you some of those in the future videos. Today just giving you a sample of the changes, the transformations that are taking place in some of these more established and older neighborhoods like South Rumvelt Gardens, Roxanne Burnham Gardens, GuyHoc Gardens, and so on in this neck of the woods, this South Georgetown. This was used to be, you know, the residential neighborhood in South Georgetown. Now if you lived in this neighborhood before and you're familiar with its history and how it has been transformed over the years, you can tell me, for example, what used to be here before all of this transformation in architecture and the growth in the volume, the size of the houses. If you know what it looks like back in the 1970s and the 1980s, share it with us in the comments below. Let us know what you think has changed or what you notice has changed since the last time you lived in this neighborhood, and tell us some of the features of the neighborhood, like street names, like the accessibility to the community, some of the rules that were used back in the early days of the neighborhood, and who used to live here, because all of these neighborhoods were meant to be housing developments, housing schemes for the Guyanese middle class. And there was a fairly successful growth and development of the middle class back in the 1980s, 1970s and 1980s, before the country took a hard left to socialism and eventually fell out with the US, got sanctions which followed, and then people started leaving. You know, a lot like what happened to Venezuela after their sanctions when the economy collapsed. The only difference is in Guyana it lasted for decades. And GuyHoc Gardens is reminiscent of a time before all of that. In other words, before the country fell out with the US. Now, of course, the US is back because oil has been found and all sins have been forgotten, and people are returning to Guyana. And the Chinese are here, the Americans are here. People are returning to Guyana to take advantage of the economic growth, and so we can watch and see how this neighborhood transforms. Morning. How this neighborhood gets transformed in the coming years as a result of the oil and gas industry. So guys, share with us what you think in the comments below. Tell me what you think of this modern version of GuyHoc Park, GuyHoc Gardens in 2023. What has changed? What is new? Based on what you noticed from having lived here in the past, and leave them in your comments below. Share this video with friends and family around the world. Let people know what's happening in the fastest growing country in the world, Guyana. Later!